How does it feel to walk in the footsteps of a saint?
Mission San Diego de Alcala has been a big part of my life. I grew up only a little bit over 3 miles away, so I was around it all the time. And it was also the last place I lived in San Diego before I moved north to the Bay Area. So there's definitely the sense of his presence there. It's sort of in the air and in everything that you see. So there's a presence of holiness and of the sacrifice that Father Sarah and his fellow Franciscans made. So it's very palatable.
I feel like we should have done this first, but it's okay because we can edit it out. So, who are you, and what is your relationship with the mission?
I'm Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, Archbishop of San Francisco. I was born and raised in San Diego, and I grew up very close to the mission, only a little over 3 miles away. So I saw the mission a lot. It's, of course, only a mile down the street from the stadium there. That's changed names several times. But drove past it all the time, visited it many times. And it was the last place I lived in San Diego before I moved north to the Bay Area.
What can you tell us about Father Sarah?
Father Sarah was from Mallorca, in the island off the coast of Spain. He follower of St. Francis. He's a Franciscan, very highly educated. He was a university professor, a specialist in Duns Scotus, who developed a certain school of theology, who defended the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. But he decided to give that all up. It was a very comfortable life. He gave it all up to go to the missions and spread the gospel. So he made huge sacrifices to do that. He began in Mexico and worked his way up eventually to what is now California, beginning in San Diego and then establishing the chain of 21 missions from San Diego up to Sonoma, that chain of missions along the coast. He founded 9 of them personally himself before he died. He had the vision that kind of the Spanish king and queen had of bringing the gospel and educating the people and eventually making them fellow Spaniards, equal citizens with the native Spaniards. So when Sarah and his fellow Franciscans arrived in a new place, they would establish a mission, establish a school at the same time to try to educate the people. And also he ended up having to do a lot of defending of the people against the abuses of especially the Spanish soldiers. This is an interesting story in San Diego because if you know where Presidio Park is, that's where we call the Presidio. The Presidio is the soldiers' barracks. Well, San Diego was the first mission and they established it there. The idea was they would establish everything there, right? The mission church, the school, the soldiers' barracks, and everything would be centrally located there. But there was an Indian uprising after a few years because the soldiers were abusing the women. And in fact, one of the Franciscans, Father Luis Jaime, was shot with an arrow and died. He's buried in the mission today. Father Sarah defended his assailant and pleaded for mercy for him so he would not be executed, and so he spared his life. But that's when the friars figured out they needed to move the mission away from the soldiers' barracks. So that's why where the mission church is now, it's several miles away from where the Presidio is. And everywhere there's a Presidio attached to a mission up and down the coast, Santa Barbara, San Francisco, the Presidio is several miles away. So it's an example of the care that the Franciscans had for the indigenous people. A couple of other examples. It's a famous story about him when he was upset with the harsh treatment they were receiving at the secular governors. So he had a bad leg, but an ulcerated leg. He walked all the way from Carmel to Mexico City to meet with the viceroy and get special faculties for governing the Indians, so he could get away from the civil governors. And then he walked all the way back. So he did make great sacrifices. Another example, when he went to San Francisco to establish the mission there, and he needed to ask for more soldiers, he asked that he be sent soldiers who were married, and they'd be sent with their wives and their families, so to minimize the danger to the women that the soldiers were inflicting on them. So Father Serra really served with heroic virtue to try to eventually, and his fellow Franciscans and those who followed after him, the vision was to educate them, reading, writing, arithmetic, all that, growing crops, domesticating animals, as well as teaching them the Catholic faith, to eventually to teach them self-governance and then hand the territory of the missions over to the Indians for their own self-governance. The problem is the system fell apart before they were able to get there. It was going to be a very long project. But then the Mexican government secularized the missions, and so it all kind of fell apart before they were able to achieve that, which they did achieve in other parts of Latin America, but they got started later in California, and there was less of a sort of a civilizational infrastructure to work with. If we could think of other great civilizations like the Mayans and the Incas, they already had a lot of advancement in the sense of understanding of science, buildings, and things like that. So they had kind of more cultural infrastructure to work with. They had less in California, and they got started later, so they never realized the vision, but that was the vision.
What can you tell us about the excavation site?
Yes, the excavations are there. We can see where the Franciscans lived. There's the Indian graveyard there as well. Most moving to me is the Father Serra's quarters, where he actually lived. It's still viewable, and you can see what a very simple, austere life that he had. But it's to be there in that room where Father Serra slept and where he prayed is quite powerful.
How has the mission changed over the last 250 years?
Oh, the mission has changed so much. They built it there. Well, they moved it down, and then they built it where it is now. But it's been dilapidated over the years and rebuilt. It was seized by the American government after California moved into the American period, and was actually used as a stable by the Army, where they kept their horses. But Abraham Lincoln deeded the mission back to the church, and the mission archives actually has the decree signed by Abraham Lincoln. So it's gone through a lot of phases. So it was restored, it was dilapidated again, and then it was rebuilt in the 1930s into what it is today to replicate as much as possible what it looked like before it fell apart.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Okay, good. You're welcome. Glad to do it. It's a great history.
Yeah, sure is.
Good.